Well, hello out there again. We got a production today uh, about an interesting subject. It certainly goes along and correlates with the subject matter that we have spoken of in the past. It might be a little bit strange, perhaps, to some of you to consider some of these things. Nevertheless, I felt like it was a good idea to uh, expose you to some of these concepts because in reality, uh, this is one of the things that we have been working toward. Now, uh, I don't mean to trample on anybody's personal uh, views and so forth, and I won't, but just wanted to expose what I've termed exo-commerce. Now, one of the last webinars that we had done on accepted for value, I was trying to introduce some metaphysical concepts that correspond to the concepts that we're working with here in the third dimension or in the physical world, with the concepts that surround the concept of accepted for value. So you had a little bit of exposure already to some of these other dimensional thinkings and so forth. So I thought I'd proceed today with continuation of that thought process, and you can take it for what it's worth, reject it totally, or perhaps take a look at this uh, from a different point of view. So anyway, I'll launch into it. Unlike other presentations that I've made, in this particular instance, I've actually written a script. So I'll basically be reading from a script for this presentation. And by the way, if you'd like a copy of this script, uh, if you just send an email to the office and request this script, they'll send it out to you free of charge. So anyway, with all that said, let me move into the subject matter today, which is basically an introduction to the concept of what I would call exo-commerce. Now let me start in here because as I go along there will be some explanations uh, that may be helpful to you to understand what it is I'm getting at here. For instance, many of you may have been exposed recently to a term known as exopolitics. Now, some of the leaders in that area have been a gentleman by the name of Stephen Bassett, Dr. Stephen Greer, and Dr. Greer has recently come out with a documentary movie. I think it's called Sirius. Anyway, it's quite interesting. And then another notable character in the world of exopolitics is Dr. Alfred Weber. Now, let me give you these names, and you can write them down, and you can go and search these names on the internet. And I would suggest that you take a look at their YouTube presentations. They're very well done, and they give some interesting information that would be useful to you now and in the future. So anyway, let me just hold these up, and you can go and copy it down and go look on the internet for these things. I think you can see first name Stephen Bassett. Second name Dr. Stephen Greer. Autofocus is going in and out. Third name Dr. Alfred Weber. Then there's a fourth one you might want to check out. This is not really a name, it's an acronym. But if you want to go and search the internet for the character known as Cobra, I think his website is Portal 2012. Anyway, if you want to look into the subject of exopolitics, these individuals have some very interesting things to say. As a matter of fact, Dr. Weber has created a online internet study course complete with a certificate of completement. And so you have those things available to you. So anyway, going on this concept of exopolitics. Exopolitics has to do with pressuring the various governments to disclose the presence of extraterrestrials and the ongoing governmental interaction with those ETs. And there are many and some very serious reasons to press for this disclosure, as these gentlemen will discuss when you have a chance to look at their YouTube presentations. Now, the question always arises, are there aliens among us? Well, after the thousands upon thousands of reports by reliable men and women, and after the thousands of sightings that you see on YouTube monthly, no reasonable man or woman would dispute that there is something, perhaps a little bit unexplainable, but nonetheless real. So, it's the purpose of this short presentation to expose the concept of what I refer to as exo-commerce, or in other words, what commercial interaction might go on between Earth people and visitors from the far reaches of space. Will they actually do commerce with us? Or will we have to learn to do commerce as it exists in other places across the universe? Or some say the multiverse, like Dr. Weber says. So, or is it something we ought to be considering at all anyway? Well, for what it's worth, let me give some of my own experiences and things that I have knowledge of, or things that I have experienced that might be helpful, for your consideration. Now, this first story I want to tell is something that happened to my great aunt, or my father's aunt, and this occurred way back in the early 1900s. And this is going to be interesting to you. Anyway, my father's aunt, her name was, we called her Aunt Lizzie. Anyway, Aunt Lizzie, as she was known, was a farmer's wife who lived in the hills of eastern Kentucky. And although there was civilization around, anyway, she lived in a rural setting in the foothills of the Appalachians, more or less a remote area. Anyway, Aunt Lizzie was a God-fearing woman. She was religious and spiritual. And on one occasion, one of her little sons became ill, and regardless of her faith and all that could be done for the child, she at last feared for his recovery and despaired for his life. So, she undertook to pray and fast for his recovery. Now, she had prayed and fasted for 3 days when, as she was sitting on her porch, 2 young men came up to the house and asked if she had a sick child and whether she would like them to come and deliver a blessing to him. She readily agreed to their proposal, and so these 2 young men went in and gave a blessing to the sick child. And then they turned and left. After seeing to the child, Aunt Lizzie went to thank them for their effort, but found that they had just disappeared. So she went out of the house and looked around the house, could not see them, looked up everywhere she could look, realizing that in the short interval between the time that they had done this and before she went to look for them, that there was no way that they could have walked or ran so that she couldn't see them. As a matter of fact, her husband and her father were working in a nearby field, and so she went and asked them, had they seen these two young men, and neither of them had seen the young men either come or go. Now, Aunt Lizzie was a believer, and she could only conclude from her training that these two young men were angels sent from God. Now, this is how we would interpret this occurrence from a religious perspective. But let's look at this experience using different words and concepts. First, Aunt Lizzie had been asking God for an intervention. And then suddenly two young men show up at her door and go in and administer to the child. After that, she went to find them to thank them for their kindness, but couldn't find them. They had vanished in an abnormal fashion. So anyway, I think we could conclude that these two young men, whether you want to use the term angels or extraterrestrials, were not the normal people that we typically interact with in this dimension. Certainly different from the typical Eastern Kentucky hillbillies. Perhaps if there was a newspaper headline in the local paper, it might say something like, E.T.'s visit Aunt Lizzie. A little humor there. All right. Now, this is not your typical E.T. story. But this is a bit different than the typical close encounter that we hear so much about in today's world and in the news. But was this a true example of intervention on this planet by entities from other worlds? The answer is obviously yes. In this instant, we are just using words that are found in a way of describing events, whereas in another arena, we might use other words to describe this event. And in other cultures, we have the same sorts of reports of ETs as in Native American cultures where other world visitors come, perhaps as the results of a dance or other efforts to draw entities into an interaction with people here in the third dimension. So we have an ongoing relationship with entities from perhaps other planets or even other dimensions all through our history and in all cultures. The real question we need to ask ourselves is, how do we interact with these others? See, this is the subject of exo-commerce. If we treat the visitors like we typically treat our neighbors, or even as we treat our friends across the planet, will that form of interaction serve the purpose of all concerned? So that's a question. What would have happened, for instance, if Aunt Lizzie had been suspicious of these two young men? What if she had turned them away because of some inherent distrust of strangers? What would have been the results? Would the child have recovered? Well, that's one of those what-if questions. Can't really be answered. We can only guess at the answer. But the key here with Aunt Lizzie was that she was asking for intervention on the behalf of a child in faith, and her request had been satisfied, you see. All right. Now, let's address the concept of mankind. It is obvious that our physical body came from the earth. The scripture says it. It indicates, it says, from dust thou art, and to dust shalt thou return. See, so this is pretty much a given. We understand that. But what is not so obvious is the energizing element which causes the body to get up and move about. Some call this energizing thing a spirit, or some call it a soul. But did this soul come from the dust of this earth? It seems obvious to me that such is not the case. And if this soul did not come from this planet we call Earth, where did it come from? And by definition, would we not would we not conclude that this soul is an ET, extraterrestrial? I would think the answer there would be yes. So where did it come from? Are there others like that? Are there others like it out there in the universe somewhere? How was it created? Who and what is the creator of that? You see. Well, we don't have all the answers for those things, but it appears that we have a few, and so we discuss those few. So the direction of what I have coined as exo-commerce is how do we relate to this concept? If we have entities, perhaps some of which look like us, and maybe some that don't look so much like us, that might suddenly land in a spaceship in our front lawn, what would you do? Do you run for the shotgun, or do you brew up a fresh pot of coffee? Which do you do? Unfortunately, many would assume the posture of the ostrich with its head stuck in the sand. But is there a better way to address this situation? So the position of exo-commerce is that we can be prepared to have a useful and meaningful interchange, or what we would call commerce, with visitors should they appear. Now, let me relate some of the experiences that I've had in my life, or things which others have reliably reported to me. My first memory of a UFO was when I was 17 years old. It was a typical flying saucer that so many have reported seeing. But who was in the saucer? Or was it even manned at all? Well, I don't know the answers to that because it didn't land and no one got out to talk to me. But it was very real. It was very plain. It was in broad daylight, and I was I was not dreaming. Then, probably about 10 or 11 years ago, I made an acquaintance of a man who, as it turns out, is a Pleiadian. Now, he is not a Pleiadian soul who has incarnated in a typical Earth body, but he told me that his family had been on this planet for 13 generations. Now, I don't know the time span for these 13 generations, as this man is actually 119 years old, and nor can I validate that his family is actually from Pleiades, but it is obvious that he is not a typical Earthman. He told me that his people usually live to be about 150 to 175 years old, which means that even though he is 119 and I'm 65, that he will no doubt live longer than I will, unless something else happens. Now, another example is another trusted friend of mine revealed that he was visited since 2009 by 3 Pleiadians right in his front room in broad daylight. One of whom revealed that he was the father that had brought my friend onto this planet in the very first colonization. Now, how many incarnations this friend has passed through over how long a period of time, I can't say. But these visitors did open up many things which are of great interest. And then another one of my friends, the ex-CIA sort of fellow, told me that he used to go down to Peru to interact with the Pleiadians who land there on a continual basis. The one lady who had come spends much time with the native people there, assisting in education, healing, and so forth among those people, sort of like a mission of mercy. I asked him how he was able to locate these space people, and he said that the natives had erected a big sign which simply read, "Place where the spaceships land." So it wasn't too hard to find it. Anyway, another acquaintance that I had made, actually a native man from the Northern Utes up in Northern Utah, had told me about little men who fly around up there on flying discs, gathering up radioactive materials in the mountains up there. I asked him if he ever talked to him. He said, yeah. He said they spoke English. He said he said that there were huge steel doors about 30 feet high, which would open and close, allowing these flying discs to come and go. I asked him if he had ever gone through these doors, and he said yes. He said that it seemed like that it was a tunnel that sort of stepped down on various levels as it went down into the earth. He said he hadn't gone very far down in there, though, because he's afraid to. And another friend of mine told me about a visitor who had come into her home from inside the hollow earth. Apparently, she was very tall, or he was very tall, but luckily the house she lives in has a 10-foot high ceiling. I asked her if this entity was physical and did she actually touch him, and she said yes, and that he had told her that he was sent to be her guardian. And I've also talked to another man who reported that he was actually born uh, inside the hollow earth, had been brought to the surface for various reasons. And listen, I could go on and on. And I'm sure many of you have similar experiences, similar associations, things that you've seen, instances that you've known about, and so forth. And so we have countless stories about these kinds of interactions that Earth people have with angels or with extraterrestrials or interdimensional entities. The stories go on and on. Now, is it possible that some of the visitors here uh, are not so friendly? And the answer is yes. But you can go on the internet and read all about that. Apparently, that particular problem is slowly but surely being dealt with by our friends. I would suggest listening to these gentlemen I mentioned before, and also look up some of the things with Cobra, and some of those things can be explained. So I don't need to address those situations on this short talk. But anyway, you can go and review some of those things on those websites and so forth. All right. So with all of that in mind, doesn't it make sense to start to think about how we will interact should we have the occasion to meet up with some of these other folks from places outside of our normal interaction with the people who are already on the planet? I would say yes, it makes perfect sense to me. Now, what kind of cultures do these visitors come from? It seems obvious that they are more technically advanced than most of us here presently are, but what of their morals? What are their philosophies? And the way they interact with those of their home world? And how do they interact with the people or entities that they encounter as they travel about the universe? Now, even though we are rapidly becoming more and more enlightened on this planet, and there have been great advances been made, but anyway, we do have a pretty ugly past. History records all the wars and some terribly atrocious things which have happened here. It makes one wonder why we would even be in a position to entertain people from faraway places. But it is evident from the few incidents that I've related and the many thousands more which could be cited that we have had many visitors here from beyond the confines of Earth, and the incidence of visitation is on a rapid increase. So what do we do to prepare to have a Syrian or an Agarthan over for Sunday dinner? Or like my Aunt Lizzie, how do we receive an offer of assistance from two young men who seem to appear out of nowhere and then return to nowhere? Uh, who who you going to call? Ghostbusters? Little joke there. Well, let's take a short journey here back into some reports of our past and perhaps our beginnings on this planet, at least from one point of view. Let's review the Garden of Eden story as an example. Now, whether this story is an allegory or whether it's a bona fide first-hand report is not the point of this review, but I want to make some observations about how man relates to living here on this planet. First, it appears that the man known as Adam and the woman known as Eve lived in a tropical paradise. It had to be a tropical paradise, as they had no use for clothes. And it appears they could just go out and gather up whatever they needed for food, as it was abundant all around. And they did not need shelter, apparently. I guess they could just crawl up in the shade of a tree and sleep if they needed to sleep. I don't know that they did. So, anyway, we have here a circumstance where the three necessities of life for people on this planet, namely food, clothing, and shelter, were immediately supplied in their immediate environment. Now, what if we were in the circumstance not needing to worry about food, clothing, and shelter? What would we have that we presently don't have? And the answer, or one answer, is free time. Oh, yes, free time. What a concept. Wish we had more free time. But free time has certain implications that ought to be considered. Now, myself being an observer of people and being an amateur sociologist, I have made an observation about people in free time. It is not the free time itself which creates a problem, but it is what people do with free time that sometimes leads to problems. Now, the old timers, my parents' generation, way back, they had a saying: idle hands are the devil's workshop. Uh-oh. So what would happen to us if we had as much free time as Adam and Eve had at the very first? Would we make good on that situation, or would we get kicked out of Eden? My observation is that one can measure a society's morality based on the amount of free time that they have. It seems like the old saying is applicable, that idle hands are the devil's workshop. When people are in a life and death struggle to maintain their lives and have just barely enough free time for sleep, that doesn't seem to cause a whole lot of trouble. Now, that's not to say that their level of consciousness or spirituality is high or low, but there doesn't seem to be too awful many quarrels going on between neighbors when it's obvious that they all must work together for their survival. So, the question then for some down-to-earth introspection is, if you had an increase in free time, what would you do with it? Would you jump on your dirt bike and take off for the hills? Would you sleep more than necessary? Would you idle away your time? Now, these are all things to be looking at and to be concerned about. Or would you perhaps take more time to study? Would you spend more time in prayer and meditation? Would you get around to visiting that sick friend, and would you check in on the widow down the street to make sure that everything was taken care of? You see. So the question is, how do you spend your free time? Now, my observation is that if you're not already doing those things, that if you were given unlimited free time, you would not magically change your habits. So, we generally need to consider what we're doing right now and what is our direction. We need to have our moral compass already set in the right direction, with the possibility that we might have more free time coming up than we can successfully deal with. Now, what if the ETs came and brought what's called free energy devices? What if the ETs brought food replicators? What if the Earth itself moved in such a way that the continents shifted so that all the land was in a tropical environment? What would you do if you had the chance to live in Eden or in paradise? Now, these are some of the serious considerations and things to be addressed in the future upon the subject of exo-commerce. Now, let me get a drink here. Much has been said and postulated leading up to December the 21st, 2012, and much has been said since about the concept of ascension and enlightenment, these opportunities for the people on planet Earth. Are those things being made available to people here? Well, I can assure you that the answer to that question is yes. It's obvious to me. Is it obvious to you? Well, maybe it is and maybe not. That depends again on you. I have demonstrated by a few illustrations taken from my own experience that there are others already here in full operation. Are there more to come? Well, you can be assured that there are more to come. But the real question we have to ask ourselves is whether or not are we individually prepared to fully receive what is and will be offered. If you've been keeping up with the real news that you can find on the internet, not the major media, you will surely realize that we on the planet are in a major upheaval. The dark cabals are slowly but surely being done away with. The financial matrix on the planet is being fixed. The justice system all over the planet is under sequester as it is being bit by bit corrected. Now, why is this happening? Could it be that we are preparing for a major shift on the planet? Are we preparing for visitors from a higher realm? Whether you want to call them ETs or angels or whatever. Anyway, are we preparing for them to come among us and impart a system that is the normal way of doing things where they come from? See? Now, I have been entertained for some years by a movie called Field of Dreams. Some of you probably have seen that. And in one scene, one of the phantom baseball players asked the character played by Kevin Costner, "Is this heaven?" The character played by Costner replies, "No, this is Iowa." But those who have seen that movie will recall that there was always this underlying whisper. The whisper said, "If you build it, he will come. Or if you build it, they will come." So that was being whispered all through this movie. Now, isn't this perhaps the situation we find ourselves in? Perhaps the question begs, if we build it, will they come? See? All right, finally at last, at least in the movie, Costner's character was satisfied because he did come. In our own situation, what have we built so that they will come? Perhaps we need to build more than just a baseball field, but let's consider the bigger theme presented as a field of dreams and take it out of the dream state into reality. So what do we have to build so that they will come? I had started lecturing under the title of Solutions in Commerce way back in 2004. Had I been an educator before that? Yes, I've been teaching as much light and knowledge as I have been able to for all my adult life. But since 2004, I have been centering on commercial solutions to the problems that are perceived to be the most debilitating to people. I've undertaken to expose some of the things which have hampered the people from exercising their right to free will. This planet was designed as a place for free will for the people here, but free will has been under attack on a continuous basis. Now, I am perhaps an out-of-the-box thinker. I sometimes see things a bit differently than other people do. And like Agent Gibbs on NCIS, I don't believe in coincidences. If something happens, it's because someone or something caused it to happen. So over the years, as Solutions in Commerce, or now as it is as Winston Shrout Solutions in Commerce, I've tried to present as much history about commerce which I thought would be valuable to a proper understanding with an eye towards liberating people so they could have access to the universal law of free will. And we've covered a wide range of subjects, from acceptance for value to understanding money to working in the court system or to just good old basic love your neighbor concepts. And we've been at this for almost 8 years now. And as an aside for all you numerologists, what does the number 8 signify? Well, to me, it signifies completion and the start of something new. So this is why I've been inspired to take up this new field of exo-commerce. Now, if you have not been sleeping or daydreaming at the seminars and webinars that we've had, but have taken what has been given and internalized it, simply put, you are ascending. Now, I had once done a 2-day workshop some years ago. We had a real good attendance, a real good crowd, a real good audience showed up and participated. And as I was being driven to the airport to return home, my driver received a cell phone call, which he put on speaker so that I could hear it. The caller said, "I got it." And I asked, "What did you get?" And the caller said, "You were giving us a spiritual message." And I replied, "Yep, you got it." And now, and many have reported to me that having attended a seminar or perhaps listening to the seminar DVDs that we produce after an event, that they get more the second time than the first time. And even as they listen again, they understand more yet. Now, the reason for this is that I have been teaching at a fourth dimensional level. Now, if you're in the third dimensional or a third dimensional thinker, you will hear it at that level, but as you start to assimilate the information that I give out, you start the ascension process and move up and up in your understanding. Now, this is not some sort of an ego issue with me, but I have found this to be the case. A lady once sent an email to the office complaining that Winston was not telling everything he knows. And my response was that I was telling some of what I know, but yes, I wasn't telling everything that I know. I don't think people would have the time to listen to me to tell everything I know. They'd probably end up getting bored. But anyway, as the adage goes, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Now, I've found this to be the case with myself. I am first and foremost a student. And in my capacity as solutions in commerce, I am sort of like a student teacher, like we used to have when we were in school, or maybe like a teaching assistant, something like that. Anyway, I consider a man named Roger Elvik to be one of my teachers. Now, Roger was gracious enough to come to one of our seminars and to speak for a while to the audience. And I would suppose that perhaps I understood maybe 75% of what he said, but I estimated that many of those who listened might not have gotten that much. So this demonstrates that we are all on an educational journey. To some, I am a teacher, but in relationship to others, I am a student. This is called Ascension. This is called progress. And yes, I'm still progressing just like everybody else. Now, what happens if we had the opportunity to interview someone from the Pleiades, or from Sirius, or from Andromeda? Could we come away from that conversation with something which we could put into action for our benefit? That is a question that we ought to take a close look at. Now, I will point out, but not to be critical, that if you can't carry on a realistic conversation with Winston about the topics that we go into in our educational opportunities, that you might have a hard time having a conversation with an ET, or an interdimensional entity known as an ascended master. Let me give a hint. Look in your New Testament of the Bible, and look at all the ways that people address their comments to the man known as Jesus. Now, some of them called him the Son of David. Some of them called him the Son of God. Some addressed him as Master. Now, why do you think they called him Master? Now, know also that when Jesus taught, his words fell upon many categories of people. Sometimes he was speaking to the masses, sometimes to his disciples, and sometimes he spoke privately to the apostles. Did Jesus tell everyone everything that he knew? It doesn't appear so. It seems he taught line upon line, precept upon precept. And as the people moved along, line upon line, more and more was given. And are we any better than them? See? So we have to be careful in our progress. Now let's consider the impact here for a moment. Let's consider the impact that our efforts on the commercial scene on the planet, and what the prospects are in the realm of exo-commerce. Now, from time to time, we have commented, or some have commented, that after all they have done, that nothing seems to be working. Now, I have compared this to the idea of taking one swing with an axe against an oak tree. It just isn't going to fall down with just one swing, or perhaps a great many swings, you see. We have to keep on working at it until the job's done. Let's take the accepted for value technology as an example and see if our efforts with that technology has had an impact. And let's look at it from 2 points of view. Number one, our point of view, and then also from the point of view or the perspective of the system. As we have pointed out, when a presentation of a negotiable instrument is made, the only available remedy that we have is to accept it. This is consistent with how the system works in our financial situation, due to all the countries on the planet operating from a bankruptcy position. If our situations here in our situations here in the United States, we find the corporate United States operating a Chapter 11 reorganizational bankruptcy from the position of debtor in possession, which means that it functions in that bankruptcy basically as the trustee. Now, many people who don't understand how bankruptcy works don't realize that the purpose of a bankruptcy is for the debtor to discover the assets of the creditor. See, people look at that backwards. So, in essence, the U.S. as debtor in possession is in the position to discover the assets of the creditors of the United States, which is the real people in the country. Once those assets are discovered, the debtor in possession goes about to relieve the creditors of their assets using the concepts of honor and dishonor covered under the Uniform Commercial Code. Now, when we do an acceptance for value and return for value or return for settlement and closure, we are only protecting our assets from seizure by the debtor in possession due to us becoming a delinquent creditor. Remember that the U.S. corporation is the same as, or joined at the hip, so to speak, with every other corporate entity. All other corporations are simply baby corporations of the mama corporation known as the U.S. Inc. And the mama, along with the babies, are hungry for the assets of the real people. And they keep getting hungrier all the time. As the statistics show, that 50% of the available workforce is employed by the federal, state, and local governments. Looking to the future, that statistic, if it continues to climb, will end up in disaster, or perhaps it already has. In any event, an important concept to understand is that any debt, to be a valid debt, must have a redemption. When we do an acceptance for value of a presentment and we return it for settlement and closure, we use our exemption as a pass-through Treasury direct to the ultimate surety, which again is the global debt facility. Now, this is the correct method that has been established, but let's take a look at the concept of accepted for value fostered by the U.S. Inc. and all the baby inks. The U.S. Incorporated is not passing the debt back to the global debt facility, but is holding the debt to themselves. Remember that when we do commerce, remember that we do commerce with a debt currency. The currency itself is a debt or a liability, but it does have a redemption if passed back Treasury direct. But since Mama Incorporated and all the baby incorporateds are holding that currency and not redeeming it Treasury direct, there is a huge buildup of debt energy which is not redeemed. Now, how much of this negative energy can Mama and babies carry without imploding? Well, the answer to that is perhaps they have already imploded. So with the demise of the Federal Reserve banking system, we have the first indication of that implosion. The system is crumbling in on top of itself. Now, that's why I have continued to suggest to people to keep accepting and accepting every presentment that comes to them, regardless of whether or not you have to suffer with further attacks for failure of the corporations to adjust the accounts. Still keep accepting, knowing at some point that with the buildup of unredeemed debt that the system has to implode. My observation is that as accepted for value has become more widely known and practiced, that we have had a major impact on the fanatical system of intentional theft by the mamas and the baby corporations. Now, it should be obvious to any observer that the system could not carry that much debt energy without destroying itself, you see. And now, those unresolved accounts are holding massive amounts of fugitive tax funds. Every financial transaction is just that, a transaction, meaning the consideration is passed in one direction only. With the system dishonoring our acceptances for value, there is the flow of negative, unredeemable energy into that system, with the resultant meltdown that is occurring at a more rapid rate each day. And mama and baby corporations are failing to pay the transfer taxes on those accounts. Oops. How long can that go on? See? So, unlike young David, who was able to fell the mighty Goliath with just one well-placed stone, we have had to pelt the juggernaut with literally thousands, perhaps millions of stones, with results that we now see all around us. So who says accepted for value doesn't work? It may not just be working in the way that you had originally perceived. And as the ashes are swept up from a failing system of commerce and finances, have we not cleared a spot so that the ETs have a safe landing spot on our Earth? I would venture to say that we're starting to get to that point. You see, the people from other planetary systems do not operate as we do here. There aren't any banks. There isn't any money. There isn't any greed. See? They don't have they don't have those problems. They have all that they need to supply the just needs and wants of the people on their planets. And they have employed the system suggested by the master and have all things common. See? Now, the doctrine in the Bible states that the earth is full and there is plenty for all. What happened that we don't practice that? Will the ETs who come here be able to help a population which is so steeped in greed and selfishness that we got beggars on the street, we got debtor prisons, we have those who live extravagantly to the demise of others, and on and on? Can the ETs deal with us? Well, they certainly can't deal with people who promulgate those kinds of things. And we would go further with many of the technologies that we've employed as taught over the years as solutions in commerce, and also many other teachers also, not just me. What impact would you imagine that such things as appointment of fiduciary, subpoena dues is taken, UCC1 financing statements, security agreements, commercial liens, and all these things have had upon the implosion of Mama Corporation and the babies? See, a close analysis of those items would demonstrate a similar results as the accepted for value situation that I have just described. So, for those of you who have been utilizing these technologies over the years, you should realize you are the ones who are cleaning up the planet. It may only be one piece at a time, but that one piece means something. I have never had confidence that our planetary cleanup would be the results of the efforts of the governments or banks or the court system. This is proven not to be the case. The real cleanup on the planet will not occur from the top down, but has to come from the grassroots, from people being people, instead of imitating a fraudulent fictional system. So take heart. Now, regardless of whether the leaders of the world's governments are pressured for disclosure by the efforts of the exopolitics movement, the people at the grassroots level are squared away and ready to welcome and exchange with our cousins from other planets and galaxies, and heck, maybe even from the whole universe. Our message to our space friends and family, to the extraterrestrials, to the ascended masters and other interdimensional beings is, come on down. We have cleared a spot for you right here on planet Earth, and you are welcome to come anytime you choose. We have a redeemed cadre who are ready for what you can bring us. Thank you for even considering us worthy of your attention. Anyway, that's the end of my little presentation here today. I've enjoyed giving it. These are things that I enjoy talking about. We're looking at opportunities here in the near future, perhaps, to uh, be involved in some of these things that I've spoken of here. So I'm really looking forward to it. I hope you are too. Again, if you would like a transcript of what I've spoken of here today, if you'll simply send an email to the office asking for, I think I entitled this one, Introduction to Exo-Commerce. If you'll simply send a request to the office in email form and ask for that, they'll send it right out to you. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your efforts, and we can move on.